Hi there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to basically the sixth of these little videos I've done. I did distillation and maturation and what is Scotch and how to drink Scotch. But the last one was on the history of Macallan. It was part one, and it was the ancient history. It was the older stuff. It was all the way from 1700 when they built Easter Elky's house, that little house that's on the bottle of every bottle of Macallan, 1700, all the way through the formation of the distillery, going legit, and then the sort of more ancient history of how Scotch became so popular, etc., etc. But today I'm going to cover off on the more modern history, more of the so it's from the 60s onwards really, because I left off in the 60s. In the last part. So this is the second part, the more modern history of the Macallan. And then I'm going to do a quick piece on collectability, because I get asked all the time about Macallan. Why is Macallan so collectible? Why is it the luxury option? And to me, that's very interesting as well. The rise, essentially, of Scotch collectability and investing in Scotch, which was unheard of until a couple of years ago. Up until about 10 years ago, there was no such thing as collecting Scotch. It was just stockpiling, completely different. But now people are collecting, and there's investment in Scotch. It's crazy. So anyway, starting with modern history. Now, starting right at the start of the 60s, up until the 60s, the Robertsons Trust, the Robertson sisters, Elspeth, Agnes, and I had it in rehearsals. It'll come back to me. The Robertson sisters, these three sisters, were basically bequeathed the controlling stake in the Macallan distillery from their father and their grandfather, who had been working with the distillery and owning the distillery. And they were subject to a hostile takeover attempt in the early 60s. And they decided that the only way they could protect their interests in the distillery and to keep it in the family was to create a charity. So they set up the Robertsons Trust in 1961. The idea being that all the profits from the distillery go to help, in particular, women and children, primarily in Scotland, but as time has gone on, it's become more and more worldwide, and it's disadvantaged communities all around the world. So that's why they set up the trust. But then in 1965, there was a period of expansion where we really put a lot of investment capital into the distillery and expanded. In 65, we actually went from 6 stills to 12. We doubled our capacity in 65. And then in 66, the Kemp Trust, which was the trust up until that point, became a private limited company, and we were floated on the London Stock Exchange the next year in 1968, or 2 years later, 1968. And then again, another period of expansion in the 70s. 1974, we added an extra, 6 stills in 1974, bringing it up to 18. And then we added another 3 in 1975, bringing the total up to 21. Now, in the 70s, the 60s was really, the 60s and 70s were when blended Scotch was very popular. And in one of my other shows, I said that some people hate on the blended whiskey. I don't drink blended whiskey. I only drink single malt Scotch. As I said in the other show, we owe the life of the single malts to the blends. If it wasn't for the blends, the single malts wouldn't be around. We owe the very existence of the single malts to those blends. We needed the single malts. Single malts were created to basically go into blends after Innis Coffee developed the coffee still. Long history. If you want to know more about the history of distillation, that was 2 shows ago. All on here. They're all still listed here on Facebook Live. Go back and learn a little bit more about distillation if you want. And then that was the 70s. The single malts were really just starting to come into their own. We really, brought up production. And then in 1980, now this is the thing that blew me away when I first found this out. Macallan wasn't really a brand. It wasn't sold as a single malt brand until 1980. Yes, the distillery was set up in 1824, probably making it for a little bit before that, under the radar, as it were. But we went legit in 1824. But in 1996, Highland Distillers comes along and buys a controlling share in the Macallan. Back to the 80s, I skipped to one. In 1980, we launched Macallan as a brand. And I thought that was really fascinating that, we'd never really been a single malt until the 80s. And that's when we really brought ourselves up as a brand. But as I said, in 1996, Highland Distillers buys a controlling share of the Macallan. And then in 1999, 3 years later, Highland Distillers is bought by a new entity called Edrington. and it's been called Edrington ever since. Edrington is actually the name of the Robertson sisters' estate in the Scottish Borders. So we decided to honour them with the name of the company and call it Edrington. And that was Highland Distillers being bought by Edrington. And then in 2000, the year 2000, we released, that was a year later, we released our first ever single cask, and it was called Exceptional One. And then a year later, in 2001, we opened the Macallan Distillery Visitor Centre. And that operated for many years until we opened a brand new one, which I'll tell you about in just a second. But before that, 2004, we launched the Fine and Rare range, which is the Fine Oak range, which is a much gentler range, relying more on American ex-bourbon casks, so a much lighter style. Those whiskies, those bottlings and labellings have all but gone away. We've kind of edged those out in favour of Double Cask, which is our new launching SKU. We have Double Cask 12 at the moment in the market, but we're just, literally as we speak, bringing in Double Cask 15 and 18. Into the markets here in America. So that's the new wave of style with the Macallan, this double cask range. Absolutely beautiful, beautiful juice. 2009, we launched the 1824 collection. A lot of, when I first joined, everyone was like, they're taking the numbers away, they're taking away all the age statements, it's a tragedy. We actually took away the age statements from all of the markets apart from the US, Russia and Asia to protect the age statements for those more mature markets. So all the people in America, they're robbing us of the number. No, we're doing it for us. We're keeping the age statements for these markets. So think yourself lucky. But then, as I said, we decided to really, really ramp up production. We planned a brand new distillery. 2014, we laid down the plans for this brand new £100 million, $140 million new distillery. And then in 2018, we opened the doors of the new visitor centre and the new distillery, and it is absolutely sensational. It won awards before it was even finished. And then once it was finished and we opened it, it won the top architectural design award in Scotland, and it's in Harper's Bazaar as one of the 100 must-visit places in Forbes, and all this is the must-visit places in the world. So really over the moon at that. So there we are. Now, that's the kind of the more modern history, bringing you up to date, if you will. But I also wanted to do a little piece on collectability because it is a very interesting part of what we do. And it goes all the way back, obviously we've been making Scotch for 200 years. But the rise of collectability is really, in my mind, kind of the last 15 years, but definitely the last 10 years. The prices really just started to go through the roof as of 2009, right? So in 2009, up until 2009, the most expensive Scotches, I found a list when I was researching, and it was the 15 most expensive Scotches in 2009. And of the 15, the list was dominated by Macallan and Dalmore. 6 were Macallan, 6 were Dalmore, and the others were random stuff. The number one spot being a 1926 Macallan, Fine and Rare. Bear that in mind for later on. We're going to cover back on that. 1926, Fine and Rare, $75,000. That's how much it sold for, $75,000. And everyone was like, what? Single bottle of Scotch? $74,000, $75,000, that's insane. And then just before things really exploded in 2010, Glenfiddich, of all brands, not really known for their collectability, it's certainly not in the same echelons as some of the other brands. Phenomenal Scotch, but it wasn't really known as being one of the more collectible ones. Snuck into the list. They had one listed at $120,000. It was for sale in Hong Kong airport in early 2010. I don't know if it sold for that. I just know that it was offered at that. So that was the sort of start of the ramp up. But then in late 2010, we came along with a 64-year-old Macallan. Now, what you have to realise is this was a hogshead cask, 250 litre cask, right? And at the end of 64 years, all that we had left in this 250 litre cask was just over 1.5 litres. We lose 2 to 4% angel share evaporation every year, and we were down to just over 1.5 litres out of 250 litres. So we went to the best crystal maker in the world, a long-standing luxury partner of ours, Lalique, and they made a one-of-a-kind Lalique crystal decanter called the Sire Perdue, the Lost Wax technique. And they made this beautiful decanter, filled it up, 1.5 litres, and then they literally broke the mold so that it can never be repeated. That decanter could never be repeated as perfect as it was. And we offered it up for auction in 2010. Smashed the world record price, went for $460,000. We then took that bottle on a world tour and auctioned off the little bits that were left over because it was just over 1.5 litres, and we made another $144,000, over $600,000 in all. And we gave every single penny to charity, a charity called Charity Water. And they used that money to dig over 100 wells in developing countries, safe and clean drinking water for over 30,000 people. So not only a great sale, not only phenomenal PR for us, but a great use of that money. I think that is a story well worth sharing. So that was, I went to a guy called Brett Stewart, by the way. I know him from the Universal Whisky experience now, and he's a great guy. He lives in Florida, and he's got this amazing bottle, amazing collection. But so that was 2010. Now, in 2013, we brought out Macallan M as part of the 1824 Masters series. Macallan M is still the top offering. Macallan M Black maybe is the top offering now, but at the time Macallan M was launched, 2013. Now, we produced a very special 4 bottles that were 5 litres in size. Now, they were served up in a Lalique crystal decanter, and to get a vessel that's strong enough to hold 5 litres of liquid in crystal, the legend has it that 50 bottles broke or were deemed to be flawed for every one that they managed to make stick, per se. So an empty bottle, an empty 5 litre bottle of Macallan M is allegedly worth about $10,000, just up the empty bottle. That's how incredible, how rare this vessel is. But 4 of them were made. 2 of them went in the Macallan archives, will never be sold. The other 2 went for public auction. One of them smashed our own world record for the most expensive bottle of Scotch. It went for $628,205. $628,205. That was the new world record. But it's 5 litres, so it's more liquid. But I still think that's a fantastic price. Again, that was an auction in Hong Kong, and every penny went to local charities in Hong Kong and China because of that sale there. So that was 2013, absolutely sensational. And then in March 2017, it wasn't the most expensive bottle, but it was a notable collection. We've been releasing the Macallan in Lalique collection up until this point. I think the first one came out in 2007, the Macallan 50 in Lalique. Then there was a 55, 57, 60, 62 and 65. But the collection, we offered a full collection in March of 2017 of the 6 Lalique bottlings. And it came in this beautiful Lalique offering case or presentation box or presentation display, whatever you want to call it. Absolutely sensational. Only one in the world sanctioned by Macallan and in this display cabinet. And it went for $993,000. Almost broke the $1 million mark. That was 6 bottles admittedly, but that was an amazing next step in the evolution of Macallan as the most collectible Scotch. In case you're wondering, Highland Park is the second most collectible at auction, just so you know. But then, in October of 2018, we ushered in the era of the golden cask. It's called the Holy Grail of Scotch whisky. It is cask number 263. Cask 263. It was laid down in 1926. Remember I told you earlier on about the fine and rare 1926, right? 40 bottles were drawn from that cask in 1986 and bottled at a 60-year-old. 14 of the 40 were for the fine and rare range that we spoke about before. Remember, one of them was for sale at $75,000. 12 were given to pop artist Sir Peter Blake, who did the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album cover for the Beatles. 12 were given to Valerio Adami, another pop artist. 12 were given to him. And then 2 were sold without a label. And one of them was auctioned, and it ended up with an Irish pop artist, which I'll get to in just a second. But in October of 2018, one of these bottles surfaced. It was actually one of the Valerio Adami bottles, surfaced the 6-year-old 1926, and it went for £814,000. That's $1.1 million. So for the first time, we broke the $1 million mark. And it also, these bottles hadn't been seen of for decades, right? The Sir Peter Blakes, the Adami, the Michael Dillon, they hadn't been seen for decades. Then suddenly that one went for close for $1 million, and suddenly they all started popping up out of nowhere. Suddenly everyone was like, what now? I'm selling mine. And they just started popping up, and they just started creeping up and creeping up and creeping up. Bizarrely, to me, the Sir Peter Blakes aren't worth as much as the Adamis. I thought Sir Peter Blake would have been a bigger name than Valerio Adami, but you know, these things, sometimes you have no control over these things. And then in November, you know, a few months later in 2018, Christie sold another bottle. This one was the Michael Dillon. Now I said there was 12 to Adami, 12 to Sir Peter Blake, 14, and then 2 were sold unlabelled. So one was given to Michael Dillon, an Irish pop artist, and he hand painted the bottle and he hand painted Easter Elfie's house on the bottle. That's our spiritual home there. There we go. So he hand painted that on one of the bottles, and he wasn't very famous at all at the time, and you know, for many years it wasn't considered to be as valuable as the other ones, especially Sir Peter Blake. But because there's only one of them, and it's hand painted in lacquer, it's beautiful, that one went up for auction and smashed their own world record again in November of 2018. Went for £1.1 million, that's $1.5 million. That was sold in London. So that was we broke the $1.5 million mark, way over the £1.1 million mark. But that's still not the record. The record stands as of October of last year. Sotheby's sold a bottle of the 1926, the fine and rare range 1926, of which there is 14. It went for £1.5 million, $1.9 million. The current world record, $1.9 million, £1.5 million. Amazing to think that 11 years ago, the most expensive was that bottle at $75,000. Now it's almost 2 million. Incredible surge in popularity. And I get asked all the time, why is that? Why are we so collectible? And it comes down to a number of factors. One, we are by far considered the luxury option when it comes to Scotch. And the reason for that is really the amalgamation, or the crossroads between the fact that we have insisted on those sherry seasoned casks. When everyone went to bourbon casks, primarily when sherry died a death in the 80s, everyone transferred over to bourbon casks because they were cheaper and more widely available. We stuck with our sherry seasoned casks, and that's what led to that more rich, heavy, full flavour. But also, the Macallan New Make Spirit is very rich and oily and very luxurious. So the melding of those two factors is what really makes Macallan so luxurious. But then, the other factor in my mind is the fact that we have been very, very good and diligent over the years of releasing weird and wonderful and crazy collectibles. And a lot of that is down to people like Ken Greer, who was the creative director of Macallan for decades. He created the fine and, I think he was instrumental in the fine and rare range, in the Masters of Photography, in all of these sort of collectible, limited edition runs. We've been doing it for decades. In fact, one of my prized possessions is this little puppy. I'm going to handle it very carefully. In 1996, we released a couple of bottles. It wasn't a super limited run. There was 5,000 of them. They sold for £35, $50 in 1996. Right, when single malt Scotch wasn't really super popular, and it was to celebrate the launch of the 35th birthday of a political satirical magazine in the UK called Private Eye. So we released the Macallan Private Eye. Now, they change hands at auction now for about $2,500, $2,500, £35 up to like £2,000. It's incredible. But I'm very proud of this one. Oh, by the way, the label is lacquered, and it was designed by a guy called Ralph Steadman, phenomenal artist called Ralph Steadman, and I believe that I own the only one in the world signed by the artist. So that is one of my prized possessions. So it's all about the collectability. It's limited edition, limited runs, fun whiskies for weird and wonderful reasons with beautiful labels. We've been doing that for decades, and that is one of the reasons I think we are by far the most collectible, and have been for decades. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is my basic bits and pieces. That's what I wanted for you. I'm going to sign off on my main stream now. Thank you very much for tuning in. We'll be having another little session very soon. Thanks for joining us.